Hello, DCA students. This is Dr. Litton, and I want to first of all say I'm sorry for not having been able to be there with you this past week, but we're going to proceed with a review for Test 3's material. I've posted some material in the Google Classroom Drive, and also I'm going to do this little recap of modernism and beyond, really is what it should be called, modernism and beyond, because we've got some writers here from the modernist movement and some who are from beyond that movement. First, let me apologize because I've been out sick. I've been in the hospital, and I'm trying to do this with some severe vertigo, so it's a little bit difficult for me to look at the screen for very long. So if this is choppy and I have to stop and start, just hang with me, okay? I'll let you know when it ends. I'll try to keep it brief for both our sakes, okay? Just want to recap some of the things that we've been reading regarding 20th century works, early 20th century works in particular, and their impacts. First of all, when we talk about modernism, we're talking about a group of writers that began really after World War I. We talked a little bit in class about the trauma of World War I and how it was a war that really just didn't make a lot of sense. Not that any of them do, but in particular, one crazy guy assassinates some petty aristocrat, and all of a sudden the entire Western world is at war with one another. Millions of people die because of some silly thing that happened, and people get dragged into wars that they didn't really want to be in. And at the end of the day, there was kind of nothing to show for it. In fact, a lot of people look at World War I and they say, really, it was really just the first chapter of a two-chapter war, which is World War II, which followed on the heels of World War I and was primarily because World War I wasn't settled properly in some ways. That's for a history class, not for this class. But just to suffice it to say that a lot of people at the end of that World War, the war that was supposed to end all wars and didn't, walked away very disillusioned and said, human beings just wage war for no reason. There's nothing to benefit or profit from it. There's no rationale behind it, and these were people who were brought up in the late 19th century, many of them, who believed in traditional values and believed in respecting authority and believed in patriotism and those kinds of things. And, they began to question that, and they began to question, do I really have a handle on the truth, whatever that is? I don't want to spin this as saying that modernists were a bunch of know-nothings. They weren't, but what they were is people who said, look, we really need to question ourselves and our societies and art and music and philosophy and politics' ability to give us the big answers, right? Because these are all human things. They're not God things. They're human things. And human things, no matter how ingenious they are, have their limits in being able to explain our circumstances. So can you get very philosophical, but modernism is a kind of a philosophical movement. It was really about exploring how art, literature, philosophy, and music functioned from the premise that a single perspective, like a single writer or a single experience, like your take on the war, you were a private in the war and you experienced this and this and that. Well, is that sufficient to explain the war, or is it just your particular perspective, you see? Well, that seems to be an obvious answer. No one can have this kind of all-encompassing experience or collection of experiences that can reach broad universal truth, because we're just one person. Each of us is just one person. So in a certain sense, the art is designed to depict individuals and their experiences, or individual moments, or individual instances, or scenes, not some big, broad, panoramic thing. It's not about like the history of the world or the truth according to this person, the truth about the universe. It's far more modest than that, in that it acknowledges the limitations of individualism in this respect. Remember in the 18th century how, and especially in the 18th century in Romanticism, it was this explosion in the rise of individualism. The individual can know the world. The individual can understand the universe. The individual can, if she or he puts their minds to it can master a knowledge that is universally true about physics, about economics, about all kinds of things. Here we see people saying, whoa, slow down a minute, tap the brake. What can we really know? What can one person really know, a poet or writer or whatever? What can we really understand? There are limits on that, right? And now some people were very, very skeptical and very cynical and disillusioned. Others were not so much so. They were just acknowledging that now, just because you go out and discover something that you believe to be true, what can we really extrapolate from that? How far can you go with that? So modernism in some respects perceives and presents the world as a series of fragments, right? Because each of our experiences, each of our lives is a fragment of a large mosaic. You ever seen these big mosaics that are made out of little pieces of glass or tile? And, the little individual pieces don't mean much, but when you put them all together, you can stand back, you can say, a picture, right? So it presents the world through a series of fragments, perhaps related, perhaps not. It's the reader's or the viewer's job to try to make sense of those fragments. By the way, there are a lot of early 20th century films as well that do this, right? You can see a lot of experimental film that tries to do this as well, because film gives you only one perspective, and that is whatever the camera wants to show you. You see, you don't see things that the camera doesn't show you. You only see things that the camera shows you, right? So there's a funnel and that all of us have, and that funnel is our experiences. So the result of that is that a lot of people look at modernist, or what I'm really going to lump all together and say early 20th century and some later 20th century art or literature or music or film, as having a sort of abstractness to it. You've seen abstract modern art and you say, what is that, right? One of the reasons that you think that way is because, the artist is wanting you to struggle to make sense of it, because life is not set. It's not easy to understand, right? You say, what does that mean? And the artist nods over your shoulder and says, exactly. I want you to have to try hard. I want you to struggle to try to understand this work of art, because life is about struggling to understand our experiences here. Okay. So if you're saying that, if you're scratching your head and tilting your head and looking at a work of abstract art and saying, I don't get it, the artist is going, good. I want you to keep trying until you do try to make some sense out of it. And the sense or truth you make out of it will be thoroughly informed by your set of experiences, because you haven't experienced somebody else's life, right? You can't. Also, the second thing is, because they're focused on sort of the fragmentary nature of knowledge and the individual's experience, they're going to be focused on the elements of a literary work or an artistic work, right? They're going to be focused on images. They're going to be focused on sounds. They're going to be focused on words, okay? The elements, because at least the elements, when you reduce it down to almost an atomic level, you can understand that. You can see that, you see? May not be able to get the big picture, may not understand why, the big W, why behind everything. Why does this happen? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do wars happen? Why do all these things happen? You may not be able to understand all of that and all of its intricacies, but we can understand some of the elements, you see. We can at least reduce things down to their ingredients and study the ingredients, and maybe that gives us an indication of what all of this big picture would mean. Now, the Imagist poets, people like Ezra Pound up there, he with the great hairdo, wish I had that hair. H.D., Hilda Doolittle up there also. They were very interested in presenting larger truths through single or a series of images, right? Sort of snapshots of truth. You remember that Pound wrote in a station of the Metro, and H.D. wrote a number of different poems. We read 2 or 3 of them. Remember the one with the sea pines, right? The pines, the waves, and so on. So these are very striking images, and they want to leave an impression on you that the image is more than just an image. There's something to it. There's truth or meaning to it. But what that truth or meaning is very difficult to try to tease out, okay? And it's going to be up to each individual reader to try to tease that out. There's work to be done for the reader of an Imagist poem, okay? If you look at some other poets like Robert Frost or James Dickey, who I don't think people would necessarily categorize as certainly Imagist poets, they still used a lot of images in their poems that meant an awful lot. Look at Dickey's The Lifeguard. Look at all of the sort of Christological images, the walking on water, the baptism, the rebirth, right? The resurrection kind of thing that you see in Dickey's poem, The Lifeguard. Those are very central to understanding that experience. It's a lifeguard. It's a young man who felt like he could do anything and save anybody. He was the hero and he fails. And so in that failure, he has to ask himself, why did I fail? I don't understand. I'm a trained lifeguard. I should have been able to save this child. And he didn't. And there's a huge contrast there with those Christological images, right? Images that remind us of Christ, where Dickey basically says, presents us with a figure who thinks of himself, I think not blasphemously, but as, I should be this person's sort of secular savior. I should save him from drowning to that extent. And I'm not. And neither are you, right? Neither are any of us. None of us are capable of doing that. And what do we do with that knowledge when we're tasked with that responsibility, but we can't possibly fulfill it and be perfect? We can't. What do you do with that, with the aftermath of that? And to that extent, that ties in also with Robert Frost, who walks away with, specific images. The mending wall is an image. The road that forks in the road not taken, right? The snowy woods. There's always a place that's really important to Frost, and those places carry a lot of importance, but we have to tease the meaning of that importance out of it, because what does that wall represent? What does that fork in the road represent? Well, it's more than just a fork in the road. It's more than just a rock wall. I can tell you that. Those are more than just snowy woods. There's something he's trying to get at about life in those images. And so while I wouldn't call Frost or Dickey Imagist poets, I would say that they were very influenced by the Imagist poets, and I wouldn't necessarily say they were both necessarily modernist writers, but they were very influenced in this idea that I can latch on or identify a specific thing, a specific image, a specific small truth, and maybe I can help the reader arrive at a larger truth about life, about themselves, through a close examination of that. Now, that also ties in to this other idea with the modern fiction, 20th century fiction, where we get short stories like Weird Ones. I gave you Weird Ones on purpose. Why did I do that? I gave you Weird Ones because I wanted to show you that really one of the hallmarks of 20th century short fiction in America is this idea of sort of an unresolved or disturbing conclusion, an unresolved or disturbing end to the story, a story that doesn't quite wrap things up with a bow, but that you walk away from saying, ooh, what the heck? And no one is better at that than Flannery O'Connor, where she's going down a particular path and takes a hard left turn. You don't see it coming, right? When he grabs that leg and runs away, you don't see that coming. And neither does the main character. And to that extent, she wants to put you in the position of Holga, right? She didn't see it coming. Neither did you. Be honest. You didn't see it coming. And she's got to learn something from that experience. I don't know what. It's very open-ended, isn't it? Will Holga learn anything from it? If she does, what will she learn? Maybe she just becomes more bitter. Maybe she doesn't. But the thing that happens in O'Connor short stories that happens over and over again is each of us is always presented with a pivotal moment in our lives where we have to make a decision about what did this thing that happened to me mean. And you've got to make meaning out of it. You've got to figure out, why did this happen? What was it about? Where did this come from? What do I do with this knowledge now that I have it? This thing got dropped in my lap, and now I got to figure out what to do with it. And so you see that over and over again, and Holga's confronted with that, and then she just leaves you there, and just leaves you just like Holga. You're left in the loft having to figure out, what do I do with this information? And we see that also to some extent with some of the shocking conclusions, like where are you going, where have you been, where we have to ask the question, did this happen or was it a dream? If it was a dream, why did she dream the way she did? If it wasn't a dream, why did she behave the way she did? Weren't there other opportunities or options? What is Oates getting at? There were some big, allusions, if you will, to fairy tales or folk tales that we talked about in class. It's got a kind of a big bad wolf kind of vibe to it. It's got a little bit of a Little Red Riding Hood vibe to it. It's got a Three Little Pigs vibe. I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow the house down. I mean, all kinds of kind of a Rapunzel thing. It's all wrapped up in there. And that has a lot to do with the fact that Connie's an adolescent on this cusp between childhood and adulthood, right? She's making that transition like all of us do. And that's a hard thing to do. It's a scary thing to do, right? And here's this Arnold Friend person who, if he's real or not, I don't know. He's based on that actual person, the Pied Piper of Tucson, Charles Schmidt, the serial killer. If there are people like that out there, and when you're a child, your parents protect you from that to some extent. But when you become an adult, you become aware of it. Something's going on in that story that Oates is trying to present to us about becoming an adult is risky and dangerous and kind of scary. A lot of decisions can be made, kind of like Robert Frost's road that forks in two paths. Which one are you going to take? Well, once you go down one, you've made a choice that leads to a whole lot of other ones. So notice the open-endedness of it is what I'm getting at. Even the fiction is very open-ended. The lottery leaves you asking more questions that are answered. You finally find out what the lottery is for, but then you're scratching your head going, what in the world do they do this for? What is this all about? What is Jackson trying to tell us here? It probably has something, in my mind, to do with the mindlessness of just tradition for tradition's sake, right? There are societies that do things that are, they only do them because they've been doing them for years and years and years, and there's really no reason to keep doing them. We just do, and we never question the old ways of doing things when we probably should, right? Sometimes it's a healthy sort of skepticism or questioning. Why do we always, just because we always have, right? Well, now that doesn't seem right. And so there's probably that element to it, but there's something deeply psychological about, what is she also revealing about human beings' willingness to pretty much just go along with the group, no matter what the group is saying, even if what the group is saying is really bad. We're all susceptible to groupthink. Very interesting studies have been done about that kind of thing. How far will people go before they finally assert their own individuality and say, I'm not going to have anything to do with this? You'd be surprised how far people are willing to let groupthink go. And so we're left with that kind of question. I think it's no coincidence that the lottery came after World War II, right? When people blindly followed governments all over the planet. Just because the government told them to do something, or because they've always done something, or I hate these people because our people have always hated their people, kind of thing. The dangers of that, of course. So where I'm going with this, and I'll wrap it up here. Actually made it through without passing out, so in one clip, is we're looking at modernism and modern 20th century writings, both poetry and short fiction right now. We'll get into Harper Lee soon. And we're looking at how these works are written by people who are trying to understand their lives, trying to understand the lives of others, trying to understand society. And we only have a very small lens, our own, to look at these things through. But that doesn't mean that what we have to offer isn't of value. It just means you have to rein it in a little bit. Modernists are the last people in the world who are going to make broad, sweeping statements about, well, listen to me pontificate about what the universe is all about because I'm the fountain of all knowledge. No, they're much more modest than that. Modernists are modest in that regard. Okay, so for our Test 3, I'm going to post this up on YouTube. You'll have seen it by now, I hope. And going to be posting a very short sort of written list of things for you to study. We'll have our test on Monday. I hope to join you. I hope I'm feeling well enough to join you on Monday and proctor it. And in the meantime, you just keep reading Harper Lee if you've got some downtime and want to. It's not a long novel, but it's a great novel, and it's a very engaging one. And so keep chugging along there, and we'll get at it as soon as I'm back up on my feet, okay? I appreciate you guys being patient with me. Bye-bye.